All right, good morning, everyone. Get started. So a quick recap from last week. We were going into the halachas of Talmud Torah. First, we went into the halachas of kvias itim leTorah, that a person's required to set a certain amount of time out of his day, every day, in order to learn Torah. We discussed when the best time to do that is after Shacharis. And then we got a little bit into, we skipped to Shulchan Aruch Yoredeya, Siman Reish Mem Vav, where there the Shulchan Aruch goes into all the laws that pertain to learning Torah. And we discussed in some of the first halachos was when a person also being kovea itim Torah. Then we got into should a person get married first or should he learn Torah first? And we said there's two shikulim, that two parts that need to come into balance over here. That on the one hand, there's a mitzvah of pruruvu, starting a family and getting married. And also that once a person gets married, then he has much less taiva that can distract him from learning. But on the other hand, when a person gets married, he's got a wife to take care of. And he's at the mercy of whenever his wife gives him that call, I need you home, there's a cockroach, or whatever it is. So there's a lot more time that's going to be sucked out of your day, and now you have new priorities that you're going to have to balance with your learning. So if a person doesn't learn and have set time just to learn before he gets married, so then when is he ever going to, have that time to fully give himself into his learning and to fully gain the knowledge that he needs in Torah? So we have these two shikulim. So which one comes first? So the Gemara says in Kedushin that a person should first learn Torah, then marry a woman. But he said that that's only if, and it says because it's like Rechayim al Tzavarai, that it's like a grinding mill on your on your neck once a person gets married, right? Yeah, Yasik v'Torah first. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it adds a bitmia, like as a question. Like when you have a grinding mill on your neck, you're going to really be osek in Torah. Meaning there's always going to be that 20% of your mind that's going to be focused back on home or your wife or whatever tirdos that you have. And now you have a lot more responsibility and pressure as well to make money for the family. It's you can't just live the bachelor life and some rundown apartment, everything a mess. Now everything needs to be more orderly, so it's a lot more pressure, responsibilities that a person has. So that's why it's like rechaim b'tzavarai. However, says the Gemara that if it's ef shelo, meaning that a person has there's a person's at that stage in life, a lot of taiva. And he feels like he needs to get married, and because of that, it's going to distract him for his learning. So then it says, first get married, and then learn Torah. And we said that even nowadays in the yeshivas, different Rosh Yeshiva will give different suggestions to their bachrim. Every Rosh Yeshiva generally has like a specific age that they're going for, and then they'll also slide the scale depending on the specific bachar. So some bachrim will be more mature, they're ready to get married faster, and some bachrim, like he needs to settle down, and that'll help his learning. And you do find certain people who, once they get married, when they're in kolel stage of life, they are able to focus just as well as when they were bachrim, sometimes even better. They just feel more settled and more rooted. So it really depends on the bachrim. Everybody should ask their own their own Moreh Hara. But those are kind of the two approaches on whether a person should get married early or not, learn Torah, just focus on Torah, or get married so that you can be more settled. It's always a shikul between those two things. Hashem never makes it easy for us. And that's the second seif in Reish Mem Vav, where it talks about getting married versus learning. Now we move on to the third and fourth seif. The third one we also mentioned pretty quickly, which is that a person is obligated to learn all the way until he dies. So his entire life, there's never like, I reached the age of 60 or 80, now I'm done. Or I finished my uni years, right? I'm done with the learning mode, now I'm only in practice mode. So when it comes to Torah, it's like a lifelong journey, right? It's It's not like any of the secular studies or anything else where you learn it. Okay, I have enough knowledge. Now I'm ready to just practice it. I don't need to learn more. Torah, a person always needs to be growing, learning, and osek in Torah. And that's learned from the pasuk of Pen Yasuru Milvavcha Kol Yemei Chayecha, that the Torah should not be removed from your heart all the days of your life. And we know that naturally we forget, right? If we're not constantly on top of it, we're eventually going to forget that knowledge. The Torah doesn't want us to ever forget that knowledge. And therefore, we have to continue learning throughout our entire lifetimes. V'kol zman, says the Shulchan Aruch, shelo yasek b'Torah hu shacheach. Anytime a person's not osek at Torah, he's naturally going to forget. That's the natural mode where we let go of our memories that we're not constantly reminded of.
I'm just for the Olam to see what the Shulchan Aruch says in Ezra. He says, I'll just read it fast in Hebrew. But mitzvah kol adam sheisa isha ben yud ches v'matin mitzvah ben yugivu mitzvah min amuchar. So he says to get married at 18. If you get married from 13, that's the best. Aval koidem yud gimu lo yisa. You shouldn't get married before bar mitzvah. Ushum inyan lo yavor michof shana. And under no circumstances should you pass the age of 20 below isha. Umisha avro alav chof shana ve'ena rotel isha. And if someone passes 20, doesn't want to get married, based in koifin oiso, the based in forces him lisa k'tel kamis pure virga. So then it says, "Umiu osek v'tarach ba misyar l'sushakitei shlo yitrach mizorsav yispat min haTorah mutar l'isacheh." So he says only like if you're learning and like if you're gonna get married, you're gonna have to stop learning. Then you can't. But it seems so whatever. That's what he seems to be actually going a lot younger than what we do.
Yeah. So it was a lot younger, but people also matured quicker then. They had more responsibilities from a younger age. And life was more difficult, right? They didn't live this life of luxury where their parents are taking care of all their needs and they have laundry done for them and everything else. So that's another factor that comes into play, where if a kid is too immature at the point that he gets married, that can create a rift in the marriage early. So that's like another thing that also, like, is he mature enough to get married responsibly? So. Another factor, but from the Gemara, a person should get married latest 20. Ben Esrim l'chuppah. So yeah, that's another thing that'll come into play. Okay, and now we get up to the fourth sif in Shulchan Aruch, and this is what a person should learn. We already touched a little bit on what a person should learn. In previously when we got into Kviyas Itim Torah. Here the Shulchan Aruch has a little bit of a different approach. And he says, Chayav Adam l'shalish limuda, a person is obligated to split his learning into three parts. Shlish b'Torah shebechsav, 1/3 should go into Torah shebechsav. So Torah shebechsav will be Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. He has a little bit of a different approach here in the Psakim Uchuvos, that he holds Torah shebechsav is any like down-to-earth learning, where you're learning, it's straightforward. You don't need to look at Rishonim and compare it to other cases that are similar. It's not what's called like lamdus or drashos or anything like that. Just straightforward learning. You're learning the psukim, or you're learning what it says. Psakim Chuvas. It's the son-in-law of the Piskei Chuvas. I believe. Yeah. So 1/3 should go into Torah shebechsav, written Torah, simple, straightforward Torah. And the Shulchan Aruch says the Hainu ha'arba ve'esrim, the 24 books of the Torah, of Tanakh. And then shlish b'mishnah. Then 1/3 goes into Mishnah. Now Mishnah is Torah shebal peh. But it's straightforward. Also, you're not getting into drashos, chakiros, etc. Tahainu Torah shebal peh. So 1/3 should go into the Torah shebal peh. Upirish Torah shebechsav bichlal zeh shlish b'talmud. Upirish Torah shebechsav bichlal zeh. Torah shebechsav is also included in this. And then shlish b'talmud, 1/3 should go into Talmud, which is going to be what we call Gemara type learning. That you're understanding one thing from another, comparing it to other similar cases, v'yotzi davar mitoch davar, and you're learning one thing out of another thing, v'yidme davar ledavar, and you're comparing it to other similar cases, V'yadun b'midah she'atorah nidreshes b'hem, and you're using the 13 principles that the Torah is nidreshes b'hem. Ad sheyeda heyach ikar hamitzvos, and you're getting to the depths of what the mitzvah is all about. V'heyach yotzi ha'asar ve'amutar, and how you can come out lamaisa, asar or mutar. V'kayotze bezeh devarim shalamad mipi hashmua. And also things that you heard mipi hashmua, which other rabbanim say, and other tanaim or poskim. Ketzad haya bal umnus. So now he gives an example of how to split your time. Ketzad, how do you do this? Haya bal umnus. So if you're a person who works for a living, and you work 3 hours a day on your malacha. So they had lower amount of hours back then. It wasn't 9 to 5. A person could get away with just 3 hours of work. V'tes b'Torah, and he learns 9 hours a day. So what should he do? Korah gimel mehem b'Torah. 3 hours he should set aside for learning Torah Shabbasav. V'gimel Torah Shabbal Peh, 3 for Torah Shabbal Peh, which he includes in Mishnayos. Uv'gimel Yavin Davar Mitoch Davar, and 3 hours he should learn, he should spend on this type of deeper, lumdus type of learning. Learning one thing from another, which we consider Gemara learning. B'med Davar Mamuram B'tchilas Limudei Sha'adam. And says the Shulchan Aruch that that's only at the beginning when a person's starting off his learning journey, so he should split it into 3 parts. But once a person gets a little bit older, and then he doesn't need to learn as much Torah Shabbasav, Torah Shabbal Peh, meaning that he already has the knowledge pretty well. So then Yikra Be'itim Mizumana and Torah Shabbasav, so then he should set aside a certain amount of time for Torah Shabbasav, but it could be much less. V'divrei Torah Shabbal Peh, Kidei shelo yishkach. So now it's just going to be retention. So retention, you need much less time than learning it for the first time. So once a person already feels like he has a good feel for Torah Shabbasav, Torah Shabbal Peh, so then he can lower that amount of time, just enough in order to retain it, so that he doesn't forget it. Kidei shelo yishkach davar medini haTorah v'yafane kol yamav l'talmud bilvad. And then he should spend most of his time in Talmud, in learning Gemara. Lefi roichev libay v'yishiv daita, according to the expanse of his heart and his calmness of mind, he should put in as much time as he can into Talmud, into learning Gemara. And that type of learning. It's anything that's included in that type of learning one thing from another. Yeah.
Where does halacha fall in those categories?
So he holds that halacha would be in the Torah Shebichsav category.
It's impossible. So that's Mishnah. If anything, that's Mishnah. Meaning
Yeah.
In the old days, you had Torah Shebichsav, then you had Mishnah, which was like the halachas, but you didn't really understand what they are. And then Torah Shabbal Peh is the Gemara is to kind of explain the Mishnah, which is the halacha. Where does he get that from? What's his source? What's his book?
Yeah, it's a chiddush. But he's bringing it from when he was going into that. Yeah. His whole mahalach is more of a chiddush. I saw a different mahalach, which was kipshuta. Yeah, that. And where would he categorize halacha? Because we had the Mishnah Berurah, right? When we went through the Mishnah Berurah, he put halacha that's what we need lamaisa, right? And if you have limited amount of time, so then the first thing a person should do is psak halacha. Even here, when he's talking about, when the Shulchan Aruch is talking about Gemara type learning, he says that he should get to the mutter ve'aser, right? Meaning you should get to the bottom line, but through the whole process of like really understanding it, where it's coming from, comparing it to other cases, what we'd call iyun learning, right? In-depth learning. And I mean, I hear what Alex is saying, like to consider it Mishnah, right? Mishnah is like a written halacha, almost of from the Tanaim. Without explaining where they're coming from and comparing it to other cases and Mishnah this from that. So Mishnah, I guess, would be considered like the Pashat learning. So we saw from the Mishnah Berurah that a person has to know how to act like a Jew, and that comes almost before anything else, right? So if a person only has very limited amount of time, then the Mishnah Berurah that halacha should come first. Over here, though, he's talking about a person has a specific amount. How should he split up his time? So he's saying a third should go to Torah Shebechsav, Mishnah, and then Gemara type learning. Gemara type learning gets a person more thinking about it, and it can make a deeper rosham, like have a deeper effect on a person. It's also called like the shashua of a Torah, like Hashem's. It's how Hashem plays, like it's Hashem's game, so to speak, because you're delving into the mind of Hashem and how He thinks, and how we're meant to come out, and like the more a person wraps his every single brain cell around learning and chakiras and trying to figure out what the MS is. So the more he's able to align like every brain cell with Hashem, pretty much. And that's something very powerful. That's why the yeshivas put so much emphasis on Gemara. And there's obviously a big complaint on the other side that, they're only focusing on Gemara. What happened to Tanakh? What happened to Halacha? That's a big complaint that people often get. And I mean, the other side of that, and the Rosh Yeshivas and in Eastern Europe, why they put so much focus on Gemara, is because to give a clear message, you have to like pump one thing over everything else. And the yeshivas pump Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, and specifically really being the ayin, getting into the depth.
With Iyun.
What?
Gemara be'Iyun.
Yeah, Gemara Be'iyun. And so they put a lot of focus on Gemara Be'iyun, and when you give a clear message, it almost becomes that lafuke everything else. But when you ask, like the people who rip on yeshivas and are like, they don't learn halacha or tanakh or anything else, it's only Gemara all day. So if you ask who's machshav halacha more than anybody else, right? It's the Bachar min Yeshiva. Who's machshav tanakh more than anybody else? Bachar min Yeshiva, right? So in Echanami, maybe they don't have as much time to learn tanakh and halacha, but they put such an emphasis on the learning and the process of learning. And getting to the aimek of what it's all about, that brings the chashivas for everything else along with it. So that's it's very successful, like their system in being machshav Torah and people going into full-time learning. I mean, if you compare the Eastern European type yeshivas to all other yeshivas, how many of them stay in full-time learning and kollel and are machshav Torah and are kovei itim once they go out into work. The people who go to these yeshiva systems, the percentages are so much higher than any other, despite the fact that they're not spending as much time in Musar, Halacha, Tanakh, and other limudim. So we see that it's very effective, this approach of going deep and spending a lot of time in it. And that's why the yeshiva systems put so much focus on it. We also see over here that once a person does feel like he has enough knowledge, then he should spend most of his focus on Gemara. So the Eastern European yeshivas hold, yes, we should put most of our focus on Gemara. Sometimes they almost expect for the Bachrim to have coming with some kind of prior good knowledge in Tanakh and in Halacha as well. It's becoming more and more common for yeshivas to now have more of a Halacha Seder and a Tanakh Seder. Not necessarily Nach so much. What?
They expect you to do it on your own.
Yeah, and they expect you to do it on your own after night Seder. Sometimes they know, though, that the Bachrim aren't going to really be, and it's not taken as seriously, the Halacha Seder, the Nach Seder. Yeah. But ultimately, if a Bachar feels like they should do, then they should do it on their own. Yeah.
Does anybody speak about how much time you should spend on learning things like Kabbalah and Zohar and all of that?
Yeah.
As opposed to all the other things you've said?
So it's in the end of the Ramah. I'll quote to you the end over here. Yes. Okay, so he says over here, so he gets into what about the deeper secrets of the Torah. Ve'ein la'adam l'tayil bepardes rak la'achar shemila krisei basar v'yayin. A person shouldn't get involved in the deeper secrets of Torah until he's full already of basar v'yayin. Then you can get to dessert, pretty much is what he's saying. V'hu leida iser v'heter v'dinei hamitzvos. And that's, first you have to know what's asr, mutter, the dinim of the mitzvahs. You have to know the basics of how to behave like a Jew, and then you can get into the fancy stuff, like the deeper secrets of Torah. There are certain, specifically more in the Hasidic and Sephardic circles, they hold that Zohar is matar a person, and that a person should learn it even necessarily before he knows everything else. They do say that it shouldn't come at expense of your other learning. It should be like an addition to your other learning, but if it shouldn't be at expense of your other learning. But there are certain walks of life that are machshiv learning Zohar. Generally, in the Litvish worlds, they don't learn Zohar from a young age, or it's not necessarily focused on. Except for like when a person gets to a certain stage, you find a lot of gedolim that they're bikiyim in Zohar, but they won't admit it openly, but they'll quote it left and right. What? Even like Rav Chaim Volozhiner, like he quotes like you for sure knew it by heart, and Nefesh Chaim and stuff. Like yeah. But yeah, so in the Litvish circles, it's not as looked upon, as well looked upon. But in the Hasidic, Sephardic circles, they do put a big focus on learning Kabbalah and Zohar, and they consider that like one of the Ikarim. Here he's saying to get in, once you know like the basics, then get into Kabbalah, and it'll fit more into the picture. Yeah. So. And the Olam HaYeshivas also, they generally split between Iyun and Bikiyas. So where Bikiyas is going to be generally gaining knowledge in Torah, it's specifically in Gemara, and then Be'iyun is where you go in depth. So they generally have one Seder is just Be'iyun, and then one Seder is Bikiyas. So Be'iyun, you're going in depth and like really looking at every single Rishon, why he says what he says, comparing it to other places in Shas, Poskim, Tosfos, asking a question from another Gemara elsewhere. And then Bikiyas, you're more trying to get the Shakla V'Tarya, just the back and forth. Sometimes even get into the Halacha L'Maisa, what the Shulchan Aruch comes out. And they'll generally split their time between those two starim. That was popularized many of the Achronim, right? That if a person's learning Gemara, they should split it into these two types. The Chida writes that. The Shlah HaKadosh also writes that a person should split. So these are already like early Achronim. And then that's kind of what the yeshiva systems have adopted, to do one Bikiyas, one Be'iyun. And then anything else they do in short starim. So many yeshivas will have a short Musar Seder, short Halacha Seder, and then at nighttime they'll do a general Chazara over everything that they learned that day. And that's kind of how things evolved into what the yeshivas are learning now. And just the Ramah over here says, V'yesh omer shabatalmud bavliv she'ubalo b'mikra b'mishnah u'v'gemara. So there's also this opinion of the Ramah. So the Ramah was even more pro learning Gemara than the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch said that a person should split his time into three, and only once he knows he has a good firm grasp on Tanakh, on Mikra and Mishnah, then he can spend more of his day on Gemara than he does on Mikra and Mishnah, the Gemara can become the focus. The Ramah though says that Talmud Bavli will include Mikra, Mishnah, and Gemara. When a person learns Talmud Bavli, so then he's learning about the Psukim, and he's darshaning them, and he's learning the Mishnayos as well, that comes along, and then he's getting into the Gemara. So he says, Adam Yotze Yedei Chavase B'Shvil HaKol. That when a person learns Gemara, he's getting the full totality, because he's getting the Psukim. We see that he holds you should look back at the Psukim, where the Makor is, where the source is for everything that you learn. So you're getting the Psukim, then you're getting the Mishnah, then you're getting the Gemara. It's a little bit of everything. And therefore the Ramah holds that a person could put the majority of his focus on Gemara. Ve'ein la'adam li'umad ki'im mikra Mishnah u'Gemara ve'aposkim ani mishachem achareim uvazeh yikneh ha'olam hazeh ve'ha'olam haba. And the Ramah therefore says that a person should just put his focus on Mikra, Mishnah, Gemara, Poskim. So he adds in this Poskim as a separate category as opposed to part of one of the other ones that come after them. And through that, a person's Kona Olam Hazeh, Olam Haba, Ushar Chachmos, Umikol Makom Mutter Lilmad Ba'akrai B'Shar Chachmos. And then he goes into something else, but I just want to take a pause here, that there is another factor that also comes in, and that's a person playing into his motivation. Right? If a person knows that, especially nowadays where we have so many other things to do, it's not like we come home at the end of the day and we're just sitting on the couch. Yeah, there's TV and the news and calls and right? There's so many different things. Buying shopping online that you can do, right? You can be in 20 stores within 10 minutes. So there's so many things vying for our attention. It's more important now, more than ever, to feel motivated for the learning that you want to do, and to take achrayas for it as well. And therefore, it should also come into play, particularly nowadays, and if you're not in like a system of yeshiva. So personally, already when I was learning in Chicago, then I moved to Portland, Oregon, Denver, Colorado. Many of these places didn't have kolalim. So I would have to learn by myself in an empty room. Much more difficult when there's no particular limud that everybody's learning or shir going on. So it became like more and more difficult for me to learn anything and to follow some kind of structure. So therefore, when I asked my rebbeim, what should I be doing? They seem to lean more and more like you have to really find what you're motivated to do. And that's really going to grab your attention, focus, and like really going to get you involved. So nowadays, more than ever, especially living in Sydney, where unfortunately we don't have yet like a full-time kollel where you can go and plug into some kind of structure. So it's more important to find what you're really passionate about knowing, and then to dive into those subjects. So a person should play now more than ever into what he's motivated to learn, in order to ensure that he gets the maximum learning possible, and that also he's going to take ownership over that learning. It's like something that you want to know. I want to be koneh it. I want to know it in its totality. I want to chazer it, and I want to retain it. So when a person is motivated to learn a specific thing, even though it might not be, let's say it's not Gemara, right? And it's not one-third, but now a person might have to play a little bit more into his motivations. He has to know what works for him as well. So that's another something else. So ideally, one-third, or you can follow the Ramah and do majority Gemara, because through that you're getting all the three different categories. That's the ideal of the Shulchan Aruch and Ramah. However, a person also needs to take into account that his motivation might go one way or another, and he might be, I want to learn this specific area of Halacha. Or I want to do Daf HaShavua, or I want to do, what does Ari Levi run, the halachos? Smichas Chaver, or something like that. So then, in that case, that should probably take precedence over learning Gemara, because you know that that's what you're motivated for. And if you would focus your time just on learning Gemara, because you don't have a structure, it might be more difficult. So a person should follow what he has a structure, what he has a passion, what he has motivation. Everybody has to know themselves and what's gonna work for them as well.
Any of the posts can bring out like not daf yomi in particular, but doing it like a set thing every day, because that's probably one of the most successful type of things, is that if you're following the whole world, daf yomi, tanach yomi, mishnah berurah yomi, you're on this like conveyor belt that like it's keep jumping back on if you kind of
if you miss a day. And
It's a discipline.
it's a discipline.
correct. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean that was Rav Shapiro's thing that he introduced that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, you see Chazal did it. Chazal made us read the parsha every week. So now everyone's on the same parsha.
Yeah.
So one guy's doing this one, one guy's doing that one.
Yeah, so you find it for Mikra, but not for Gemara. In a sense, it's like when Rav Shapiro came up with it, it's like, what do you mean everybody learns at different paces? How can you expect everybody to follow along? And it's very quick to plowing through Gemara at that kind of pace. So it seems like a wild idea, and it was turned down when he brought it in front of conventions of Rabbanim. Many Rabbanim turned until finally it was adopted, and it became such a widespread thing. And it's amazing now, right? You can go to Antwerp, Belgium, or... Well, yeah, you got this. That was enough. So yeah, and it is. It mamish works. Like when you're following along, and as soon as you fall off the train, then you see how much less learning you end up doing. I was doing Daf Yomi for quite a while. I did 2 years. But I needed a little bit of a slower pace because I had other limudim also that I was trying to juggle. And I wasn't able to finish it within the hour, 20 minutes that I allotted in the morning. So unfortunately, eventually I fell off. And then once you fall off, you're like, you don't feel that sense of achrayas. And now when I'm on vacation, I'm not taking an hour and a half and waking up very early to make sure I get my daf in. So it's very important also, like that's the achrayas and you have a specific amount, and there's shiurim that you can listen to, so you kind of feel that structure, similar to what you get in a yeshiva environment, which is why Daf Yomi is such a powerful thing. I mean, you're tapping into Gemara, post-game, you're getting a wide knowledge of learning, and you have some kind of structure that continues you forward. Okay, and we'll just finish off the seif here, and next week we'll get into woman learning Torah, which is a packed topic. It's a matter of much debate. I'll bring all the different post-game and what they say, and hopefully we'll be able to come out with the different mahalchim. And different groups hold different things, so we'll definitely get into that. It'll be juicy next week. Mikol Makam, he finishes off the Ramah. Mutar lilmad ba'akrai b'shar chachmos uvilvad shelo yiyu sifrei minim. So now he goes into what about learning psychology and maths and science and arithmetic. I guess that's part of maths. Well, philosophy, philosophy as well. So he says that yes, a person can learn Shar Chachmos, but not Sifrei Minim. So most philosophy books would not be permitted. And the Sifrei Minim really bleeds into a lot of science as well, because you're taking it from their approach. But he says that a person can learn the Shar Chachmos, but it can't be Sifrei Minim. And he says, V'zen nikra ben hachachamim tio bepardes. Huh. Is this quoted wrong? Okay, we'll put that in its own category. But basically, a person is permitted to learn outside knowledge, particularly if he needs it. It shouldn't come off of his learning time. It shouldn't be the focus of what he's doing. But if a person feels like they can gain from that knowledge, so then it would be appropriate to read those books, as long as it's not coming off of his normal time, and it's not Sifrei Minim, and the ideas aren't Keneged Torah. So if a person does want to read self-help books and they feel like it's going to get him more productive, and if he reads Power of Habits, then he is going to be able to develop better habits, use his time better. As long as it's not the ikar, it's not the focus of his life, then it would be permitted. So as a bathroom book, or something where it can be a tafel, secondary to the main thing in his life, which is Torah and Avodas Hashem. So then it might be appropriate for a person to read those books if he feels like he needs them. The Ramah is saying that that's not asur, and this is going where a person should spend his time learning, right? So a person might think, if I learn outside books, then maybe that's not lo yamushu Torah mipicha, that a person should not stop learning all day. But the outside books, they're okay. He doesn't say mitzvah to read them or anything like that, as long as they don't contain Sifrei Minim, but they shouldn't be the focus of a person's life. So again, it should be only if a person feels like he can really gain from them, or if he needs them for business or anything else, and as well, only if they're not contradictory to Torah ideas. So that's how we'll finish off. Shkoyach.